profession. That's stage one. So we were able to do this. I mean, Dr. Fihmo was a member of this. We organized the first MENA, Middle East North African Headache Congress in Dubai, which was held in 2015. And the thing flourished, and we started the second one in Morocco, and the third one was this year in Egypt, and the fourth one will be in Istanbul. So the awareness among our profession is increasing as well. If you account simple headache or the neurology clinics in Rashid Hospital, for example, 50% of those who come to visit us in neurology clinic have headache. And out of those 50%, 90% have migraine headache. Only the 10% who has hair cluster or other tension tablet. Someone who has tension tablet, I rarely see them. I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong. So we increase awareness. We, in Rashid Hospital as a team, identified this as a disease. That was the first step. Second step, we had a multidisciplinary headache clinic where we involved psychologists, peripheral health doctors, occupational therapists. We all meet together, identify those who come with headache and try to help them.
So, the one thing I want to ask is, you know, we as citizens and residents, we always come to the doctor for help. So we want to ask you two, as medical professionals, you talk about awareness, you talk about, you know, recognizing it as a disease. What can we all do as members of the community to support that? What can we do in terms of helping raise awareness, in terms of getting people to be more serious about the way they approach it?
I think number one, we have to identify this as a disabling disorder. I mean, if you have someone has chronic, I don't know, correct if I'm wrong. If someone has chronic migraine, it should be adapted in a way that they can live their life without any obstacles and difficulties. So that's number one. So identify the disease. This is a disabling disease. Number two, try to accommodate them in a way so they can afford working or living their life without any difficulties or obstacles. Number three, if there's any treatment they can provide, and they want to give them some sort of life so they minimize their headache.
If I may add to what Dr. Abu Bakr said, I mean, the issue is not only to speak out to the community, but also to educate. I mean, you'll be surprised to hear that, but also to educate the healthcare professionals.
Okay.
40% of the migraines are not diagnosed, and they're simply attributed to simple headaches, tension type headaches, etc. Oftentimes, patients come to us in the neurology clinics with the assuming diagnosis of sinusitis, which is the most common reason for patients come to us with that diagnosis. Say, well, I have a sinusitis, I've been told I have sinusitis, I've been treated with so many drugs for sinusitis, and you dig into the history, and patients obviously had migraines. Tension type headache, another mistaken disorders for migraine. So it's very important to educate not only the public about the importance of recognizing headaches, visiting the physician or neurologist for their headaches, but also targeting the healthcare professionals, primary care physicians, about identifying the early signs of migraines, how to diagnose that migraines, because that, I think, is a very critical step in increasing the awareness of migraines and addressing the needs or the unmet needs of patients with migraines. Because this is very critical. And if you look at the recent data, it suggests that less than 40% of patients with migraines are adequately diagnosed before they come to see the specialist. That's a huge number. That's obviously a huge number. And as Dr. Abu Bakr mentioned, patients need to be on the right medications. Unfortunately, now we are in 2018, we still find that more than 2/3 of patients with migraines are only treated with over-the-counter medication. Panadol, non-steroidals, Brufen, whatever you name it. So 2/3 are still using over-the-counter medication. Now we're talking about 2018. And they're still not receiving the right medications or the right treatment for, as Dr. Abu Bakr mentioned, because there's at least 2/3 of patients with migraines would qualify to be treated with what we call a preventive treatment of migraines. But with those, probably less than 10% are receiving the preventive treatment, which are drugs to prevent you from having these recurrent attacks of headaches, which, as we have said before, are quite disabling.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And we've left you last on purpose, Farah. It was on purpose because we wanted to gather all the information and then bring it to you. First of all, before we move on to Farah, if I may, Farah, how many of you knew it was this serious before coming here and listening to this? How many of you, other than the people who obviously suffer from a migraine, but how many of you knew it was not one? Okay. So this is the impact that's already happened.
Let me ask the question. Anybody
Please.
knew there is any relationship between, for instance, I don't want to scare anybody with migraines, by the way, but just want to throw out a question. Anybody knew there's a relationship between migraines and stroke or cardiovascular disease?
No.
Okay.
Well,
That's
what I really love.
There is. I mean, obviously, I'm not scaring anybody, but
Please
there is.
discuss that later.
Sure.
Yeah. I know where the first question is going to come from already, but it's just amazing to see that type of awareness being raised already. So Farah, I want to bring it to you. I want to prompt you with a question. Just what's it like to wake up and have a migraine?
Sometimes I don't have to be awake in the morning. Sometimes I'm woken up by the pain in the middle of the night. So it could be, I could be fast asleep and then 4 o'clock in the morning, I'm suddenly awoken from this piercing pain that's going through my brain like lightning, and then it wakes me up. The pain wakes me up. So, and then I know what the rest of my day is going to be like. But I know one thing, that being a chronic or diagnosed as a chronic migraine patient who's had 25 migraine days, acute migraine days, that would probably rate 9 on a scale of 10, and had 25 of those days in my recordings of the diary that I keep, different various places how I maintain that diary. And I know that one thing that migraine has done to me, it's made me a great actor. So rather than showing people that I'm in pain, I learned to show people that I'm fine. So that's one thing that I do. And listening to all these esteemed people on this panel, it's made me so emotional, and the opening comments that you made about the migraines and the quotes that you read, it was almost as if, did we have this conversation before? Well, we didn't. And those are exactly the sentiments that I have felt during pain. So it's had an impact, yes, financial impact on my life. It has had an emotional impact, irritability that doctor spoke about. Can you imagine being an irritable person if I'm suffering 25 days of chronic migraine, acute migraine pain? The impact it can have on a person's marriage, the impact that it can have on a person being a parent or being available for your children. So sorry, but it makes me a bit emotional to speak about it. Fortunately, alhamdulillah, that my family is very understanding, and they've got on board very quickly. My children have grown to see mom not being available because she's in a dark room and she cannot be disturbed. So I've lost out on being a mom to my parents, to my children. So all that has, obviously now when I look back and I'm on prophylactic treatment, preventative medication, abortive medication, and that I have that it's available to me, I'm thankful, but it does make me somewhat sad that I've missed out so many days. And in my relationship with my husband, I often say it's me, my husband, and my migraine. So it's like we have a threesome relationship. So he understands. And it's kind of made me I'm a very positive person by nature, but over the years I've become kind of negative and kind of pessimistic, I find. And if I reflect upon my own personality, because I'm afraid to commit to anything because I don't know whether tomorrow is going to be a migraine day. It's not something that I plan, but it just happens to be. So I've kind of, before somebody can say, oh, can you come to a dinner, or, you know, we're going to go to a concert, it's like, oh, sorry, I'm not going to be available. I've already said no to the commitment because I know that I won't be able to commit. And if I do commit, then comes on my act where I have to act fine, although I don't enjoy being there. So all these 25 years in corporate, I had to give up my job because I couldn't take it anymore, traveling two weeks out of the month. I was the director in a company, an American company actually. So fortunately I had very understanding people that I work with, but it was the guilt of trying to take yet another day, not being at the office. It's the guilt that kills you. If it's not the migraine, the guilt will get to you. So it's, you know, you're juggling all these crystal balls in the air, trying to make sure none of them drop, because you've got deadlines, you've got parent commitments, you've got chronic acute pain that you're dealing with. It's the guilt, it's the, you know, constantly saying no to my husband for stuff. So it's very disabling, not just like on a physical level, but on an emotional, on a, you know, it just gets to you.
Can I ask you about some of the things that, I mean, first of all, I mean, can we get a round of applause for her? Because, I mean, it's very brave of you to share. Thank you. No, really, it takes a lot of courage to be able to share that, and I truly appreciate your candor and being so forthcoming. But the one thing is we know how strong you are just based on what you said. But what I'm curious is what are some of the things that helped you along the way? Because as much as I've seen the hard times, I want to get some of the hope, because you're sitting here in front of us, you're talking about it, you've had a successful career, and I'm just curious as to what are the little parts of your life. You talked about a supportive family, but anything that got involved that helped you along the way?
Well, I think one of the things that's helped me is that equipping myself with knowledge about the disease, about learning, listening to podcasts, whether it's Peter Goldsby or speaking to Dr. Tawfiq, or you know, listening to professionals in the field, and YouTube, and reading about it as much as I can, understanding the triggers, listing my own triggers, which are like now in hundreds, because the more migraines you get is the more you have. It's like brain is a muscle. It starts to remember the pain that has given you, and it's going to go back to it. So it's almost like the muscle memory as well. So just learning so much about the disease that it kind of makes me a semi-doctor, you know? So without the professional, you know, degree, it's kind of, I understand the disease so much. And I felt one other thing that sort of helped me is that speaking to people who've been through it themselves. So, and I realized that I was a member of so many support groups around the world, and I realized, look, I don't have one support group in Dubai. So I created my own support group. I've got nearly 300 members in the support group. We share information. If nothing else, we just talk about another day woken up, and all you need is sometimes somebody to say, I'm so sorry, I know what you're feeling. Is there anything we can do to help you? So sometimes just that is enough. Obviously, for the medical side, we have to go to, you know, our doctors and professionals to help us with it, see which medicine is not working, which medicine is working. The trial and error goes in place, and then finally finding a balance. So, you know, for that we have the medical side, but then emotional side, you have your own support groups that you stick to.
I want to ask you one final question before we move to the Q&A. So the reason that we got involved in the first campaign with Novartis is my wife actually has the skin disease herself. And she personally saw the impact of the amazing campaign that was happening, that Novartis were spearheading, raising that awareness. When you heard about this campaign that's coming, the work that Novartis are putting, the investment that they're putting, how did that make you feel? And what are you hoping that it achieves for the community and for yourself?
It's a sigh of relief, honestly. It's really a sigh of relief that finally the voice is being heard. Not mine, but like doctor explained, so many people just in UAE, if you look at the chronic migraine patients, just those, I mean, can you imagine the life that they've had so far? Because we know that in Dubai, especially if you're not a UAE national, to survive in this country, you've got to be employed. You have to be employed somewhere. So the sheer existence of my being in UAE means that A, I may be either married to somebody who's employed or employed myself. So that means that being a chronic patient, I have to be employed, I'm going to work, I'm putting on a brave face, I'm supporting a family. So all these things play a huge role, and just to know that there's finally awareness and that we're hearing it from Dr. Abu Bakr himself to say that people need to understand and need to be supportive of the disease.
Inshallah, inshallah they will.
Inshallah.
Okay, how many Arabic publications do we have in the room? Okay, how many English publications do we have in the room? 3. Okay, so this is how we're going to do it. All right, we're going to go one question from an English publication, one question from an Arabic publication. How long do we have for questions?
Then translate.
There's no translation devices, unfortunately. So if there's been something that hasn't been asked, if maybe there's 5 minutes you could spare at the end for maybe a quick question, someone has a detail. How long do we have for questions?
Half an hour.
Is that okay with everyone on the panel? Half an hour for questions? That should be more than enough. Okay, let's start with the lady first, and as a first English, then we'll come back to you, sir, and then to you, then we'll move on from there. Madam.
Okay, good morning. I'm Marie Cor from the Gulf today. First of all, what makes migraine a neurological disease? And doctor, you said it is related with stroke and CVD. So please show us the relationships.
Well, I knew it's gonna come up. Well, what we know about migraine now, it's a brain disorder, and we know there are changes at multiple levels in the brain that would underline the underlying mechanism of migraine. That's why we say it's a primary neurological disorder, it's a primary brain disorder. Now, if you want to get to the issue of stroke or cerebrovascular disorders, the reason I brought it up as part of discussion, just want to emphasize the importance of identifying patients with migraine, especially patients who have frequently disabling migraines. Because there are some studies nowadays suggest that patients with specific type of migraine with aura, for the people who may not know the difference, there are 2 types of migraine with and migraine without aura. Migraine with aura, which is the symptoms preceding the migraine, usually characterized by some visual symptoms, tingling, numbness, which are the symptoms precede the onset of the attack itself. It occurs in about 25% of patients with migraine. They have migraine with aura. The most common type is migraine without aura. Now, for migraine with aura, especially for ones who have very recurrent attacks of migraine, what we refer to as critical attacks of migraine, meaning they have so frequent attacks of migraine, they are probably at relatively high risk of having cerebrovascular disorders as compared to the general population. Especially, again, with all due respect to women in the audience, just want to again just emphasize the importance of this. Women who are taking oral contraceptives, who smokes, they are relatively at a higher risk to have cerebrovascular disorders as compared to general population. The reason of bringing this up, that's again emphasizing the importance that if you do have frequent attacks, they need to be dealt with immediately. They cannot be left unattended for, they have to be treated. Patients who have very frequent disabling attacks, we need to control them, not because they want them to restore their ability to live normally in the society, have a social life, but also very importantly as well, because it affects their other medical conditions, including, as I mentioned, about cerebrovascular disorders in general. Again, there's a slight relative increased risk of cerebrovascular disorders in general.
استاذ تفضل.
ثلاث أسئلة صغيرين
انا بس سؤال واحد.
لا لا هم صغيرين
اوكي متاكد.
متدخلين طبعا.
اوكي خذ راحتك. تفضل.
هي الخطوات المقترحة لتثقيف المجتمع بالمرض بشكل عام، وبعد كده هي المقترحات لأهل المريض بشكل خاص؟ وهل المرضى له تأثير على عضلات القلب؟
يعطيك العافيه.
بس الخطوات سويناها اوريدي نحن في وزارة الصحة أو هيئة الصحة من 2015. نحن شفنا عيادات الصحة، وزارة الصحة عندك زحمة، ما عندك وقت إلا مع المريض ومدة. إذا أنت وايد زين تكون مع المريض ربع ساعة أو 20 دقيقة. في هاي الحالة أنت ما تقدر تثقف المريض والعائلة والأهل يا غير تقدر تعطيهم الدواء وتقول لهم مع السلامة. شو قلنا لا نفتح عيادة خاصة بالصداع يكون مالتي ديسيبلين، يعني في عدة تخصصات مع هذا سويناها في هيئة الصحة وبدأت تتفاعل الحين من 2016. فنجحنا فيها بشكل كبير، لأن أول ما يدخل المريض فورا يشوف طبيب العائلة يشخص الحالة، يشوف إذا في أمراض ثانية ثانوية يتأكد إذا ما في ضغط سكري، نقص في الحديد أو أمراض ثانية. هناك إذا تبين لنا أن المريض عنده صداع الشقيقة، هي عندي شخصة وتقفى، فصار خطوة ثانية. الخطوة الثالثة شو يصير عند السايكولوجيست، طبيب النفسي. يعني أغلب الناس اللي عندهم صداع الشقيقة المزمن لابد يكون معها أمراض ثانية، معها كوموربيديتي اللي تطرق عليها الدكتور. فأغلبهم اللي عندهم صداع الشقيقة المزمن من كثر الصداع وكثر الأزمات فيهم يصير لهم مرض أو حالة نفسية لها. الحالة النفسية لازم نطرق لها الدكتور النفسي ويحاول يعالجها بطريقة ما. الخطوة الرابعة يشوف الكوبيشنال ثيرابيست، هو طبيب الفيزياء،
المعالج الفيزيائي،
المعالج الوظيفي. هني يحسن يشوف وين يشتغل مثلا اتصالات أو أو أماكن ثانية، يحاول يتفاعل ويتكلم مع المدير المباشر للمريض ويحاول يحل الموضوع بشكل ودي. إذا ممكن يحل ودي وظيفة أخرى، أو يحاول يعطي لايتر ديوتي أو وظيفة، أو ينقصون عدد ساعات العمل عنده لمدة لين ما يتحسن الصداع. مجرد الثقافة هاي تكون موجودة، شو يصير؟ المريض يصير يتفهم الموضوع، المريض يصير يتكلم العائلة أو أنا شخص صداع. أهل المريض يكلموني أنا، وفي نيرس براكتيشنر أو يسمونه نيرسينج كوردينيتورز، المنسق التمريضي. وهذه يتفاعل مع كل مرض، في رقم خط ساخن له يتكلم مع المريض إذا في أي شيء بشكل. أهل المريض يكلمون المنسقة التمريضية هذه، يصير تثقيف. هذا رقم واحد. رقم اثنين، الحين سوينا عدة جولات أو ندوات تثقيفية في مستشفى راشد نفسه، نسويها سنويا تقريبا. السنة اللي فاتت سوينا، السنة اللي قبلها سوينا يوم خاص بالصداع. فيجون الناس اللي عندهم صداع يشوفوا شو أنا عندي صداع بس ما أعرف شو نوع الصداع اللي عندي. أو شو نوع الصداع عندك؟ طق 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 في تكس عندك. إذا عندك صداع يستمر بالساعات، يخف مع إخفاق الضوء، يزيد مع الحركة، في نوع معاه أغلب الظن في الصداع الشقيقة. السهل يعني نحاول نسهل الموضوع. فيطلع كثار من الناس عندهم صداع، أوكي وين نقدر نشوفكم؟ أوكي لا نحن ما لنا طاقة استعاجين نشوف الموضوع. في عندكم ساحة مفتوحة تشوفون طبعا صح أو تيونا.
عضلات القلب.
على الأقل صداع نصفي.
الصداع النصفي مع عضلات القلب، في أحيانا الصداع النصفي لأنه وايد شائع، مثل ما قلت لك 10 من سكان العالم، فأحيانا يكون معاها آلام أو أمراض ثانية، فما تدري هذا متشكل أو إيه، بس ما في دليل علمي حسب علمي أنه لا أثر بالأعراض القلب.
Please, sir.
First, I'll say some notes in English and I'll translate it to Arabic. Then I'll ask in Arabic. Okay? What we're saying about the migraine, it's disease. But I think diseases can be affect others by virus or microbes. But this is not affected. This is body action for some reason. اللي أقصده إن الصداع النصفي احنا بنطلق عليه مرض، وده اللي انا بس يعني اللي انا عايز افهمه الاول قبل ما اسال سؤالي. كمرض، المرض بينتقل يا اما بفيروس يا اما بميكروب، شيء من هذا القبيل، لكن ده بيعتبر يعني شيء من الجسم، حاجه خاصه بالفرد نفسه، وبالتالي ما يعتبرش بمثابه المرض المفهوم. يعني هل الكلام ده صحيح ولا غلط؟
بالعربي ولا بالانجليزي؟
As you like. This is as a notes in the beginning. I didn't ask yet.
يعني اوكي اذا هو رد عليك بالانجليزي عادي.
It's okay for me. Yeah.
We know it's a brain disease, because we know I told you there are some.
Sorry, doctor. Did everyone understand the question?
He's asking basically about what is migraine? Is it a real disorder, real disease? Is it transmitted by viruses? Is it what is causing migraine?
Yes.
That's what is basically the purpose of the question. Well, I tell you what we know so far. I mean, I don't want to make it too complicated, but we know now, in terms of migraine, there are some changes at the multiple levels of the brain, specifically the brainstem, that would basically give us some better understanding of why migraines begin in the first place. Part of migraine can be genetic, meaning it's not uncommon that you find families with migraines, because we know there's a genetic component to migraine, specifically certain forms of migraines. But we also know that there are environmental factors do play a role, not necessarily by causing migraines, but provoking migraine attacks. If you ask the migraineur, what is the most common trigger for the migraine? Stress. Stress is the most common trigger of migraines. Other factors, and Farah can correct me if I'm wrong, because she experienced it herself, I'm sure. Environmental factors, change in weather.
Huge.
Big factor. Anytime there's a change in weather, sure enough, they will have migraine attack.
I've got it, one of my points that makes you a weatherman.
Yes. Fasting. Fasting. Patients who fast Ramadan, it's not uncommon that during the month of Ramadan, they will have more attacks and more severe attacks, because fasting is another big trigger of migraines. So there are many triggers, and you speak to patients with migraine, they come with their own list. Now, Farah, I'm sure she has her own list. If you speak to somebody else, they have another list of potential triggers. But these are some of the common triggers of migraine. So the genetic component, environmental factors, we know there are some changes at the multiple sites of the brain, including specifically the brainstem. By the way, we see these changes at the brain at all throughout the course of the disease, because remember, as Dr. Bakr had mentioned early on, the migraine goes through 3 phases actually. Premonitory symptoms, which are the symptoms patients may feel usually a day or 2 before the migraines. Usually they feel a bit down, or on the contrary, they feel a bit up, irritable. Yawning is a very frequent premonitory symptom before they have this attack. Then they have the aura, at least in 25% of patients, and then they have the attack itself, and then they have what we call post-traumatic effect, which is the effect after the attack. And Farah probably can tell you more about this. Patients after the attack, they feel quite drained. They will need at least a day, 1 or 2 days at the minimum of bed rest before they can go on and go back to their function. So throughout the phases of the disease, from the premonitory to the aura phase, if it's there, to the actual acute phase, to the post-trauma, there are changes at the multiple sites of the brain, so that clearly tell us that it's a brain disorder. No question about it.
اسال السؤال اللي بالعربي. انا قلت دي كانت ملحوظه في الاول وقلت هسال السؤال بالعربي.
So that's not the question.
لا معلش، هو سريع، خليه بس عشان مرتبط بالموضوع برضه مع بعض اذا سمحت.
لا تفضل.
المعلومات المتواضعه ان الصداع العادي بيتسبب بسبب نقص ضخ الدم للمخ او زياده ضخ الدم للمخ بشكل او باخر. والنتيجه لكده ممكن الواحد يصاب بالصداع مثلا بعد وجبه معينه، المعده بتمتص الدم، يبتدي يحس بالصداع. ايه علاقه نوعيه الاكل بالصداع النصفي؟ هل الاكل نفسه ليه علاقه بهذا الموضوع ولا لا؟ الحاجه الثانيه، الدوره الدمويه ليها علاقه بالصداع النصفي زي الصداع العادي ولا لا؟
Would you mind if I translate?
Please do.
Okay, he's basically asking if the diet has any implications on migraines. He's also asking about if it's migraine is a vascular related to the vascular changes, basically. Correct? That's your answer. That's why I told him you know, if you go back some 30, 40 years ago, we had believed that migraine is a vascular disorder, meaning that during the attack, there's a vasoconstriction and then vasodilatation. That's what we thought back then. But now we know differently. We know, as I said, there's some neurotransmitter release, and the neurotransmitter release could cause the vascular changes that you described, meaning that they are the result of some changes in the brain that are not causing the disease itself. So they are, because of this neurotransmitter release, now there's a vascular changes at the level of the brain. So not what we knew at the beginning. What we knew 40 years ago, that these vascular changes lead to migraine. No, there are some changes at the level of the brain, multiple sides of the brain as I explained, that lead to these vascular changes that would lead to these attacks. Now, diet has any role in migraines? There's no proven that diet has any effect on migraines, but we know, as I mentioned, for instance, fasting can trigger migraines. Oftentimes, a patient come to you, they say certain food items may trigger attacks. Chocolate, egg, cheese, for people, definitely alcohol definitely has an impact. Certain medications, especially the ones that cause vasodilatation, such as nitroglycerin, they cause some bad attacks. So they are triggers. But every patient is different. For instance, chocolate. Some patients can cause headaches. Other patients actually can cure headaches. So every patient, too much coffee can cause headaches as well. So again, every patient is different. So when any patient come to me with migraines and try to list some of their main triggers, and you find, you know, astonishing different things that, I mean, every patient, some of them come to me with orange juice, for instance. Certain smell, I mean, I don't know.
And one of the
Yeah, so-
oranges.
But there's no recommendations, for instance, to follow certain diet, if that's your question. If you want to follow certain diet, if that will have an impact on your migraine treatment, no. You can only avoid what your known triggers, meaning if, let's say, cheese causes headaches, nuts cause headaches, you avoid it.
And it's different from person to
And that's different from one person to the other. So it avoids some of the items that trigger the attacks. But there's no diet I can recommend that will make your headaches or migraine better.
But like doctor just mentioned, sorry, just adding to that, my top three, if I was to list my top three triggers, they would be stress, heat, and sleep. These are my top three. Lack of sleep or too much sleep. So these would be my top three, and then again, the food intolerances or triggers can come after that, but these are my top three triggers.
Related to the diet point, we hear about certain studies about some diets that are reducing or aim to reduce the inflammatory effect of animal products on the cellular level of the human body, like vegan diets. There are some studies proving that being vegan can actually reduce migraine, or as a result of reducing the whole inflammation in the whole body. So, how true is that?
You want to take on this one?
Yeah, I mean, if you check number-wise, epidemiologically worldwide, we know that most Indians and Japanese are vegans, but yet they still have 10% prevalence of headache, migraine headache. So there's no proven study that special diet would provoke or induce headache. Otherwise, the Japanese or Indian would not have headache. That's number one. Back to your question, I remember when I was a resident, I asked Peter Godspeed, what causes the migraine? He laughed at me. He said, we don't know. And I asked him yesterday, what causes migraine? He said, still said the same thing. But we still believe that there is a generator in the brain which triggers the headache. Well, there's no proven, as Dr. Tawfiq says, every person has its own dictionary on what provokes what makes the headache better.
Because as per what you said, Doctor, a vegan diet, and I could be off here, a vegan diet could actually cause someone to get headaches.
Probably.
If they have a unique list, right?
Sure.
I mean,
I don't know. Again, nowadays we practice what we call the evidence-based era.
Yeah.
So before we recommend any diet, we have to have solid studies to advocate that use of that diet. There is, to my knowledge, and I think Dr. Bakr had already said that, there is no proven diet has shown a strong and consistent efficacy in patients with migraine.
Thank you so much. We have over here, and then to you. She had her hand raised previously. Okay, we'll go 1, 2, and then 3. Please.
بالنسبة لعلاج الأعشاب أو العلاج بالأعشاب يعني هل المريض فعلا يستفيد منه مريض الشقيقة؟
I knew this was gonna come up. She's asking about the use of herbs and management of migraines. I knew it's gonna come up. I mean, every time we speak about migraines, people ask about the use of herbs and management of migraines. Again, as I mentioned earlier, now we're practicing in the evidence. Do you mind if I answer in English, by the way?
يرد عليك باللغة الإنجليزية عادي.
You're fine? Okay. Sorry. We are practicing in the evidence-based era. And before we make any recommendations for anything, we have to have some studies to support what we say. In terms of herbs, the only herbs that have shown some good efficacy in some studies, the riboflavin, which is one of the vitamins, coenzyme Q, it has some level of evidence, and bertafur, which is not available in this country, is one of the herbs that has shown some efficacy. But the rest is all based on feverfew is another one, and magnesium. Those are the ones have shown not level A, because in terms of grading the evidence, grade A, which is the highest level of evidence, grade B, which means there are some evidence, grade C, which is very little evidence based on some case series. Most of these herbs used in the management of migraines has either level B, meaning the second layer of evidence, or level C. But then none of them had level A of evidence, meaning the highest level of recommendation.
Yes, so many anecdotal things which is done, but as Dr. Tawfiq says, if you go historically, migraine was there since ages, right? If you see Holy Prophet Muhammad's history, he was having migraine. He was having migraine, headache, and he was bending his head. And simply he was doing hijama, was giving his headache. So that's what one simple many people ask me about it. I say it's in Sunnah, and do it. It's not going to be harmful.
No, if it works, why not? If it works, why not?
It's true. Yes, please.
I have questions for the doctor and for Farah also. You're saying it's a brain disorder, right? So, is it lifelong, first of all? Secondly, is it treatable or is it a manageable disorder? Secondly, for Farah, when did it start for you, the headaches? And when do you know it's going to happen? When is it going to start?
No, you can start first.
Well, for me, migraine, actually, when I was in school, I remember going to the nurse's office quite often because the teacher would send me. And what the nurse would do is give us a Panadol and let us lie down for a while. So that's the furthest memory that I have of me having some sort of a headache. I must have been 10. Going back, fast forwarding to...
So it means it can start really very early.
It can start very early. It can carry on. Some people after menopause feel that their migraines became less. Unfortunately for me, I felt my migraines increased and I became from episodic to chronic, which was more than 15 migraine days in a month. So it can really vary with person to person. I think, again, there's no study to confirm that this will happen. And as far as I know, so far, there is no treatment for migraine. It's all about management, but I could be wrong, doctor.
Yeah.
So treatable or manageable?
Well,
Or both?
it depends how you see it. I mean, let me tell you, there are 3 components of the treatment: non-pharmacological and pharmacological treatment. Non-pharmacological meaning you need to address some lifestyle modifications, avoid certain triggers which we have talked about before, and every patient again is different, so you need to modify their lifestyle to avoid these potential triggers. So that's the non-pharmacological options, and there are some other things you may also take on that would also support and help the pharmacological component. Now, for the pharmacological component, there are two elements to that. the treatment of the acute attack, meaning someone comes in with an acute migraine attack now, what they could be offered to abort or stop the attack. And for that, there are two kinds of treatment. One is called non-specific, meaning that you can take the Panadol, the Brufen, the non-steroidals. And there's something called migraine-specific, which are the drugs that are specifically working to stop the acute attacks, and they are available on the market. They can work in some percentage of patients to treat the acute attacks, provided they are used early. Because the earlier you use these medications, the better the response will be.
Early as in when the attack starts.
Exactly. So the sooner you take these specific medications after the attack, the better the response would be. Versus if you take them later in the course of the disease, may not be as effective for reasons which I don't want to talk about because there's so much science behind all of this. Now, the second component, which is the preventive treatment. These are classes of medications we offer for patients who have very frequent attacks. Not only they're frequent, but they do interfere with the patient's ability to function normally. Again, this is very critical. If you may have one attack a month, but that attack can last several days, and it's impair your ability to function normally, restore your activity, etc. And for you, may be enough to start on a preventive treatment, because most of the preventive medications we have available, that these are drugs you may have to take on a daily basis, or at least some of them. So it's not only the number of attacks, but how much these attacks would impair your activity. Then we can consider starting you on a preventive treatment. So these are medications we can offer to reduce, number one, the severity, and number two, the frequency of the attacks. So this is basically what we do in terms of managing migraines. Now, going back to the question, is it lifelong? It depends. It can be lifelong treatment. As Farah had mentioned, for women, usually the peak age it's in the between 12 and the 20s and 30s, which are by the way, the peak reproductive years. That's why we said migraines can be quite affecting the productivity of years, and then it starts to subside thereafter. But there are some certain percentage of women who may continue to have migraines even after menopause. So it can be lifelong, but not in all patients. Specifically for women. For men, most of men after a certain age, after the age of 40 or 45, the migraines will go away. Most of them, not
How come?
hormonal change, because of the hormonal. By the way, the migraines is more common in women than men, 3 times more common in women than men.
Thank you so much. We have, okay, we'll go the quick questions,
Okay.
and 1, 2, and then 3. So please,
Should I
yeah,
start?
please.
I have only one question, but for each of them, so it's a quick question.
It's a quick question.
Yeah,
Promise.
سؤالي للدكتور أبو بكر إيه هي مضاعفات المرض؟
مضاعفات المرض مثل إذا الصداع مستمر وما تعالج بالطريقة الصحيحة، فالمريض شو يسوي عادة؟ ياخذ أدوية over the counter medicine. فشو يصير في شيء يسمونه medication overuse headache. هذا one of them. يصير الصداع أثر إفراط استخدام الأدوية. هذا واحد. إفراط استخدام الأدوية شو يسبب؟ يسبب للماين، يسبب loss of days, loss of work, decreased productivity. هذه non measurable effect. الميجربل effect شو هي؟ ممكن تصير اكتئاب نفسي. ممكن احيانا يعرض لامراض مثل الضغط، السكري، او الجلطات في حالات نادرة جدا. في حالات اللي ما نعرف السبب، شوف جلطة في الدماغ ما نعرف اي سبب، بس نعرف المريض، ناخذ القصة مننا نشوف المريض عنده صداع مفرط، يعني صداع مزمن تقريبا. هذه كل مضاعفات
I'll be given the 5 minutes, and I want to make sure everyone gets a question.
Two quick questions about تخصصات الأطباء اللي المفروض نلجأ لها لما نكون بنعاني من الصداع النصفي. وآخر سؤال لفرح, last question for you فرح, what are the lifestyle changes that you have been doing to avoid the migraine? Is your lifestyle affecting your migraine? Are there things that you have been doing, you avoided doing, so your migraine will become less?
I was
I was an avid lover of going to the gym, cardio workouts. I've had to significantly reduce those because I feel that the extreme heat, the cardio, the workup that happens, suddenly I feel my neck tightening up, and I've had to reduce that. I'm constantly complaining about air conditioning if it's insufficient in a room, so I make sure that I'm constantly carrying cold water or ice with me in a flask, because I feel that my vasodilation, maybe it's helping something, but it gives me relief. So there's a lot of things that I have to be careful about the way I used to do. I've started doing yoga just to calm myself. I'm a bit of a type A person where everything has to be perfect, everything perfection, you know, trying to strive for perfection and everything. So I've started to take a step back. Okay, you know, don't sweat the small stuff. I've had to make that change because it's, you know, it's not worth the pain that I have to then endure. So,
advice to see a neurologist.
absolutely, absolutely.
ممكن سؤال أخير بس
لا،
سبب
والله
انتشار
لازم
المرض
برد
في
عليك
العالم.
بس هم يتبينوا.
Yeah, sir, I would just like, from these discussions, I would just like to make, you know, if I've gotten everything correct, that the real cause of migraine is still unknown. And it all depends on how our brain, or how each brain absorbs everything within us and around us. So like, for example, Farah said, you know, oranges cause her migraine and everything. And so it may not be the same trigger to asthma or to me, but it all depends on how the brain absorbs the smell, the environment, the workload that one has. Correct, sir?
It's very true.
Okay, thank you, sir.
There's a generator in the brainstem which provokes a migraine of some reason, due to environment, lack of sleep, stress, any other causes. That generators gets activated, and that causes the cascade of effect, which is migraine.
Thank you, sir.
تفضلي.
نرفت عبد الحميد من قرية البيان. عايزة أعرف إزاي يفرق المريض بين الصداع النصفي وبين الصداع الناتج عن التهابات الجيوب الأنفية، خصوصا إن الأعراض تكون متشابهة كتير يعني. طيب وهل العلاج فقط يكمن في المسكنات اللي هي ليها أثر سلبي على الكلى أو على الكبد أو كده يعني؟
The difference, so the technical differences between a headache and a migraine. Again, this is basically the campaign. So we'll put that.
عشان نسهل الموضوع ليش؟
يا ريت.
صداع الشقيقة عادة يكون أحادي بجهة واحدة، عادة بس مو دائما. يكون نابض، يكون خفيف أو متوسط الشديد، يزيد مع الحركة ويستمر عادة من 4 ساعات ل 72 ساعة. عكس صداع الجيوب الأنفية اللي يكون أمامية هنا ويزيد أثناء الميلان الأمام، ما يكون معاها لوعة أو ما تستمر مدة.
صاحبها دوخة لحد ما؟
أي صداع
النصفي؟
قد يكون صدمة دوخة.
هلا كثير في حالات مرضى عنده حتى التهاب جيوب، ممكن يكون التهاب الجيوب يحرض نوبة صداع نصفي. لذلك انا قلت يمكن جيت متاخر حضرتك 60% من المرضى احيانا تشخصوا عنده التهاب جيوب لكن عندهم صداع نصفي، لانه ما تاخذ قصه صح. ما الدكتور عم بكر التشخيص يعتمد على القصه. بيكون الصداع بمواصفات معينه مدته تزيد عن 4 ساعات بيأثر على حركه المريض، بمعنى المريض ما بيقدر يشتغل. بينما المريض عنده انواع ثانيه من الصداع، صداع توتري او صداع بيبعث بيقول لك بيمارس حياته طبيعيه، بيقول لك ايه عندي صداع نصفي بيقدر بيمشي عادي بيمارس حياته طبيعيه، لكن المريض عنده صداع نصفي ما بيقدر يمارس حياته الطبيعيه. هذا هي الكي فاكتور لحتى تميز بين الصداع النصفي وانواع الصداع الثانيه، انه المريض ما بيقدر يمارس حياته الطبيعيه. شغله ثانيه نحن نقول صداع نصفي معناتها لازم يكون دائما بنص الراس، هذا الحكي مو دائما صح بمعظم الحالات صداع نصفي نصف الراس، لكن في نسبه من المرضى بيكون صداع كل الراس او على الاقل ببلش من ناحيه وبعدين بينتقل للطرف الثاني. بس حتى الناس عم تفكر صداع نصفي لازم يكون دائما بنص، لا، ممكن يبلش مره هون بعدين مره هون وحدا ببلش هون بعدين يصير كل الراس. فالناس تفكر الطباع الخاطئ انه صداع نصفي لازم يكون، لا مو دائما لازم يكون.
طيب احنا النهارده الحملة دي آخر حاجة معلش.
تفضل.
الحملة اللي احنا عاملينها النهارده نوفرتس بتقدم لنا ايه للمرضى الصداع النصفي؟
أول شيء نثقف الناس بالعموم إن في مرض اسمه مرض الصداع النصفي. أوكي؟ وهذا المرض شائع مثل ما تطرقنا فيه 10% أو 12% من سكان العالم يشتكون من الصداع النصفي. 1% من 10 هذيلا اللي هو إذا تحسب عدد سكان الإمارات مليون أو 10 مليون يعني 100,000 عندهم الصداع المزمن اللي يستمر أكثر من 15 يوم في الشهر. مجرد أن نعرف الشيء لأن فينا نحن عندنا تحديات كبيرة. التحدي الأولي أن نقنع زملائنا الأطباء أن في شيء اسمه صداع نصفي، لأنه ما في فحص دم تسوينه يبين أوه هذا الصداع النصفي. هذا المقصة التاريخية اللي أخذها من المريض. في ناس يرصون عليه يقول لا لازم نسوي صورة الدماغ، الصورة ما تبين أي شيء، ما تبين أي شيء لأن هذه خلل في الكيماويات الموجودة في الجسم، في الجنريتور في الماكينة الموجودة في الجسم مش في شكل المخ. إذا نوصل التدقيق لهالناس لهذه المجموعة من الناس هذا بروحه كفاية.
آخر سؤال.
هل الوراثة لها علاقة بنشوء المرض؟
بالنسبة للمرض ممكن يكون وراثي نسبة، لذلك احنا عائلات بيكون عندهم مرض صداع نصفي، تلاقي عند كذا فرد من العائلة عنده صداع نصفي، بس ممكن حالات، في نسبة من الحالات قد تكون جينيتيك قد تكون وراثية لكن مو عند كل المرضى.
هي ثانك يو. لازم نخلص
حاجة سريعة معلش بعد
العافية. ان شاء الله يمكن الدكاترة يكونوا موجودين عندهم اجتماعات عندهم شيء كاحترام لهم. I'd like to thank all of you for all coming today. I'd like to thank Dr. Abu Bakr and Dr. Sophie for your time, for your wisdom, for sharing all that knowledge. You can get a round of applause for Farah also.
Thank you.
And Mohammed Azadeen, I wish you all the best and the Novartis team on this campaign. What you're doing is amazing work. Wish you all the best and can't wait to see you guys again in the future, inshallah. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for your panel. Thank you.